Our whole life, we have been led to believe that it's all about doing something. Tell me how to do that. Tell me the exercises I need to do. Tell me whatever it is that I need to do to fulfill my dreams. But in actuality, there's actually nothing to do. Everything that we feel we have to do is something that actually occurs without us. It occurs as a natural response to the intelligence of life continually guiding us. There's just something inside of all living things that knows without knowing how it knows. But everything that comes into this world has a purpose for being, and its evolution is the manifestation of its purpose. And it's continually guided, just as a tree is guided up and creatures are guided where to move. Humans are also guided in the same way. Life is looking for us. So many people are focused on what do I want to make happen? And in the process of looking for what we want, we miss everything that's looking for us. And the things that come to us when we're not looking are called surprises because they happen without us. What is it that is guiding all living things to fulfill its reason or purpose for being?
Welcome to the Awakening Entrepreneur Podcast. This show is for entrepreneurs that have chosen to define their life beyond the material. They have followed their soul on a hero's journey towards the mystery of the spiritual. I'm your host, Garrett Ng. Each episode will be learning from awakened entrepreneurs and spiritual thought leaders. They have broken through the mold of being ordinary to extraordinary, challenging our paradigm, shining light to the dark, giving hope when there is doubt. The moment of truth is upon us. It is time to transcend our world from fear to love. Are you ready? Let's go! Welcome to this week Awakening Entrepreneur Podcast. It's exciting to have you. Man, I've been waiting all week for this podcast. This is one of those guests that I got on. I didn't know him prior. It just came from one of our prior guests, Master Stephen Au. I said, if there's one person that you think that I should interview for our podcast, who would that be? And he said, Dr. Jacob Liberman. And I haven't heard of that name before. I saw a busy Google and came across some videos. And his homepage about seeing and consciousness, that kind of got me already. So to do a proper intro, Dr. Jacob Liberman is a pioneer in the fields of light, vision, consciousness, and the author of 4 really popular books of Luminous Life, Medicine of the Future, Take Off Your Glasses and See, and Wisdom from an Empty Mind. Originally trained as an optometrist and vision scientist, which is very logic-based part of the brain, his life changed in 1976 after miraculously healing his own eyesight. And I'm sure that Dr. Liberman is going to go a lot more into detail on how that came about. I find this whole story really fascinating. But one of the core of what his message that really resonated with me, seeing is not just about seeing with the eyes. Is real vision is the ability to see the invisible. There's so many things that we can't see, like the microwaves, the dark space, dark energy, all this other stuff. But we have so little understanding of, and a lot of us prior to the awakening is things that seeing the material world, that's all there is. So Dr. Liberman have won a whole heap of awards around the world and constantly speak on stages, probably more than 2,000 live audience and online, and inducted in a Hall of Fame. But what I really love about him, he's funny, he's down to earth, he's relatable. Just a few minutes that we spent prior to this podcast, he's a kind soul. He doesn't make himself above anyone else, and he's just sharing his journey. So humble. So I'm really honored to have you on this podcast, Jacob.
Gary, it's a pleasure to see your bright, smiling face.
Thank you. So We start off with just sharing a bit about your story, because the awakening journey or going through this consciousness path, it didn't just start from overnight. We went through a very similar paths as a lot of us, like get good grades, go to school and all that. And somehow you came across this.
You know, our whole life we have been led to believe that it's all about doing something. Tell me how to do that. Tell me the exercises I need to do. Tell me the whatever it is that I need to do to fulfill my dreams. But in actuality, there's actually nothing to do. Everything that we feel we have to do is something that actually occurs without us. It occurs as a natural response to the intelligence of life continually guiding us. So we look at Mother Nature. The sun rises each morning, it sets in the evening, the seasons change, the tides change, birds seem to know when to fly south, animals seem to be able to detect natural events before they occur, like tsunamis, and go somewhere where they will not be injured. But you don't see animals going to exercise classes or doing meditation classes or trying to make themselves enlightened. None of them are worrying about paying mortgages or any of these kinds of things. There's just something inside of all living things that knows without knowing how it knows. The reason I start out this way is that, like everyone else, I've spent my whole life doing a subtle impersonation of the person I've always been, trying to become that which I already was, but I didn't know that, and trying to get somewhere, trying to be someone. The old question that comes up for all kids: what are you going to be when you grow up? But everything that comes into this world has a purpose for being. An apple tree never has to try to figure out what it's here to do. It just grows. And interestingly enough, trees naturally grow in an environment that's perfectly designed for them. In nature, you will never see a cactus growing in a rainforest. They seem to grow exactly in the environment that perfectly supports their ongoing development. So everything has a purpose for being, and its evolution is the manifestation of its purpose. And it's continually guided, just as a tree is guided up and creatures are guided where to move. Humans are also guided in the same way. I said in Luminous Life, life is looking for us, where so many people are focused on what do I want to make happen? And in the process of looking for what we want, we miss everything that's looking for us. And the things that come to us when we're not looking are called surprises. And they're fun surprises. They're miraculous surprises because they happen without us. In fact, that's what genius is. Everyone thinks a genius is someone with a big brain that can think a lot. But the word genius means guiding spirit. What is it that is guiding all living things to fulfill its reason or purpose for being? So I say this because, like everyone else, I've spent my whole life trying to get somewhere. And yet, 2 minutes before we came on the air, all of a sudden, I saw my daughter who was visiting with me, and she said, "What's this interview about?" And I said, I don't know, but it has something to do, the word entrepreneur was there. And I said, what just came to me right now is that a real authentic entrepreneur is someone that is planting good seeds of goodness in the world, someone that is able to invest or put something into the world that is good for everyone, that has no side effects. And I said, perhaps becoming an entrepreneur is what happens after we become an intrapreneur. That maybe something is able to see what's behind everything that's visible. That you begin to, it's not that you come to the end of the road that never exists, but you get a glimpse. And for an instance, you see through eyes you've never seen before. And it's not these eyes in our head. It's not the eye of the mind. It's the field of awareness that is noticing everything externally, everything internally, and all the activity that we call mind. There is something observing what we call our mind, which is actually not ours, but there's something observing that and is aware of all the concerns, the worries, many of the what we call thoughts. And so as we observe that, we see that what we call mind is like an infinite movie of the conditioning of not only our life, but the conditioning of our parents' lives, their parents' lives, their parents' lives through millions of years. And so, what is the conditioning? Conditioning is what creates all of our worry. Conditioning and all the internal chatter that goes on is an attempt to create three things that have never existed on the planet: safety, security, and predictability. When you realize that safety, security, and predictability do not exist in a world that's continually changing, then you begin a search for that which is not changing. The only reason we are all aware that the world is continually changing is because that which is witnessing these changes does not change at all. So people refer to this intelligence, the source of life, whatever you want to call it. Some people call it Jesus, some people call it God, all of these things. And we treat it as if it is something outside of ourselves. Something that when we want something or we're not feeling well, we get on our hands and knees, we cross our, and we pray to whatever it is, God, Muhammad, Jesus, whatever. And so it's like an idea of something that we don't know what it is.
And I think to back up on that point is when I go through various religious texts, the undertone of the text actually suggests, if those texts are accurate, actually suggests that the God is within. Like whether it's the Bible is from Buddhism, but it's the mainstream message that get portrayed is external.
Right. And it's absolutely within. And the reason I say absolutely is that my interest in light, which the Bible refers to God as light, spiritual texts speak to consciousness as light, quantum physicists speak of this ground of reality as light. And when the Bible speaks of God as being light, it describes this God as being all knowing, all seeing, and everywhere at the same time. It's interesting that omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence exactly describes the behavior of light. So it's fascinating how spirituality, religion, and science all converge at the same intersection. What I've come to notice, perhaps was the greatest discovery for myself that I made, is that the only reason we are aware of the continual activity in the mind is because something is observing it. Now, we all watch our television maybe sometime in the day, and we are moved by what's on the screen. It could cause our hearts to speed up, or to slow down, or we might get a feeling, an emotional feeling if we see something sad or something happy. But we never confuse ourselves with the television. We never think I'm the TV. But when that movie is on a invisible hemispheric screen and surround sound within our awareness, it's confusing. But when you realize that you cannot know what's happening in the mind unless you're observing it. And so then my whole search was, what is this observer? What is this witness that is witnessing all that is? And what I came to realize is the whole purpose of meditation is to notice that your essence is noticing the activity in the mind. That what you're noticing going on all the time, the antsiness of the body, the worries, the thoughts, the occasional conversation within yourself, what you're uncovering is that your essence is a source, and this continually changing ideas and thoughts and worries is the mind. What came to me as a realization is that this observer, this field of awareness, which people refer to as consciousness, I call it pure awareness, it has no point of view. It sees without effort, and it doesn't speak. So if you are aware of a voice, it's not this place. This place is what notices the voice, but it is not the voice. And this place has no desire. And so it reminds me of one of my favorite pieces written by the third Zen patriarch. His name was Sengsten. This is 1500 and something years old. It's called the Sin Sin Ming. And the first verse goes like this: "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." So what Sengsten is saying is that when we see from a place that has no point of view, no preferences, then we experience the great way. And then he goes on to say, when love and hate are both absent, everything is clear and undisguised. So what he's saying is when duality disappears, we experience clarity, which is not understanding, it's an absolute knowing. It's a knowing without a knower. It's just something is known. So that's 1500 years ago. Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas said the same thing in a slightly different way. This is paraphrased, but essentially he said, when you see up as down and down as up, when the outside and the inside are the same, when you see a man as a woman and a woman as a man, then you shall enter the kingdom. In other words, when everything is seen through the same lens, if you will, or no lens, where everything is just the same, you enter the kingdom again. And Ralph Waldo Emerson said it slightly differently, but just beautifully. He said, there's a principle underlying all things. He says, there's something underneath of everything. He says, it's a simple, undescribed, undescribable presence residing silently within us. He says, we are not here to do, but to let do. Not to work, but to be worked upon. That's one of the most profound statements I have ever heard. What Emerson is saying is what we refer to as God, what we refer to as the ground of reality, what we refer to as light, what we refer to as consciousness. The source of all that is our essence. It doesn't speak, it's silent. He says there's nothing complicated about it. It's simple. It just notices. And he says there's nothing to do and there's nothing to work on. Now, did you say you were 41?
I'm 43 now.
43. So, when you came out of your mother, your heart was pumping by itself. Something was breathing you, even though you had no idea what breathing was. Whenever you needed sustenance, you made a sound and your mother knew that she needed to breastfeed you or feed you. If you were frightened, you made a sound and anyone who was listening to the sound would know that you were frightened. You came in not knowing if you were born in America or Australia or Asia or the Middle East. You didn't know anything about religion. You didn't know anything about gender. You didn't know anything about skin coloration. You came in hardwired without any preferences. So the enlightenment, the awakening we're seeking is our birthright. We came in with it. And then the conditioning begins at a certain point. And so the conditioning can be something as simple as an infant, whenever it has to urinate, just urinates into its diaper. But when we get to a certain point, that's no longer acceptable. So the moment the child has to evacuate its bowels or urinate, the parent says, no, hold on a second, until they bring you to the toilet and they sit you on the toilet. This is the way you're supposed to do it. And so one of the first early things that's conditioned into you is that you have to hold the natural part of your system that evacuates when it's appropriate. And then as you get a little older, whenever you're taking a little trip in the car with your parents, they say, Gary, go to the bathroom because we won't be able to stop after we get started. I'm sure they do this in all cultures. So then you learn how to push something that's not ready to happen or hold something that is ready to happen. And so all of the life becomes about, what do I have to do so that my actions are acceptable? So all the worry, all the thinking, all the trying to make things happen that we call mine, that we say is our birthright, that we identify with ourselves, is everything we do to accommodate the conditioning of millions of years of evolution for which we are the current state. So I've been a doctor, I've been a scientist, I've been a parent, I've been married, I've been divorced, I've had money, I've lost money, I've gotten sick, I've been well. Everything that you can imagine. I've had miracles happen, like my spontaneous shift in my eyesight 44 years ago, which is still going on to this day. At 73, I've never used a pair of glasses since that time, and I used glasses for 9.5 years. People say, how did you do that? I didn't do anything. It had nothing to do with me. I was visited by grace. As we become aware of certain things, it is the awareness that is curative. It's not the doing, it's the being that actually allows whatever needs to occur to occur. And so I've had many extraordinary experiences in my life. We mentioned before 9 weeks of not eating, which I did in Perth, Australia. I started in Perth, Australia in 1994. People say to me, that sounds fascinating. Should I stop eating? I said, nah, probably not. Eating is so much fun. But it was at the time something that inspired me to look deeper into what I had learned and what is truth. What did I think the body needed? And what's the actual direct experience that occurs when you are there? Not something that you believe in, but something that is absolutely truth. And so that's occurred in my life when my children were very young, and my kids are both older than you. But when they were less than 10 years old, um, I was invited to something called a metal bending party. I didn't know what a metal bending party is. My kids came with me everywhere, so we went. We walk into this place. There's a big bowl of spoons and forks, and the person that greets you was wearing a white robe and says, just take a handful. Everybody take a handful. So we sit down and she starts to explain that if you're in a certain state, this metal will literally dematerialize in your hands without you doing anything. Now, of course, I've heard of amazing events and I've met amazing people, but this was something that I had never heard of, although there was a guy at the time named Uri Geller that was supposedly able to bend keys and things like that with his awareness, but I never saw him. So my kids and I followed. She took us through this visualization. We held these spoons and forks in our open hands. And at a certain point, they seemed to get warm and they literally collapsed in our hands. Now, I didn't realize this when it was happening, but when she brought us back from the visualization, my son, my daughter, and I were the only 3 people in this group of 30 or 40 that actually experienced this. Let me show you. This bag is filled with all of these
and utensils.
And some of these are really thick. And my children were, I think, like 6 and 8. And I have, you know,
Wow.
So what I'm sharing with you is of no big significance, but the reason I'm sharing it with you is my life's learnings has not been about something I read or something someone told me. It was being surprised by when I went to Adelaide to do an event, and the guy that picked me up, I had no idea, had not eaten in a year. And the people that lived in his home didn't eat at all. And then 18 people attended my event who had not eaten for long periods.
Huh.
I'd never heard of such a thing. I went to Perth and I lived in Perth for 3.5 months at that point. And something said, wait a minute, is this real? And so I went there to find out. I was inspired so that I could see for myself, what's the truth of this? What's the truth of this? That is what has brought me to this place. That is what pointed me in some direction of interest. The process of having these experiences and having them occur without looking for them, almost as if they were looking for me, has allowed me to realize that something is looking for all of us all the time. And, we often hear the expression, it caught my eye. In other words, something grabbed our attention. And what catches the attention of the eye is called light. And yet, to come back to what we said in the beginning, the Bible speaks of God as light. Physicists say light is the ground of reality. Everything that exists in form comes from a formless essence, which is fully invisible. You can never see it, and you cannot even describe it. And that's called light. So what I realize is something is continually catching our eye somewhere and moving us in one direction or another. What most people don't realize is we have probably 100 trillion pairs of eyes in our body, not just the ones in our head. Every cell of the body has eyes designed to detect and respond to light, and they can see one photon. In other words, the extreme of quantum physics, the far edge of all that we know. So something is guiding our system well before we are even aware of it and moving us one place or another.
And when you're referring to light, you're not just referring to the ones that our eyes can see, the brightness, right?
Right. We don't see light. We experience brightness and we say, oh, that's light. But we don't actually see the light. What we experience is brightness. And to give you a sense of how different light is from brightness, if we took a spaceship and went to outer space, as far as you could imagine, which is just filled with light, it would be as black can be. And that's light. So you see, we have no idea what light is. This is why Einstein said toward the end of his life, I've spent the last 50 years brooding about what is light. I don't know any more now than when I started. So light, consciousness, seeing are all very big pieces of my life. And I know you had mentioned something about breathing. So if there's something that you'd like to speak about with that.
Yeah, before we get on to that, I want to like get into the nitty gritty. I find it fascinating. I keep on hearing a lot of people that's breatharian, people that just consumes on oxygen, and always wanted to validate whether that's true. I haven't had the direct experience myself, and I hear from certain yogis, especially around the Indian region, that if you're not moving a lot, maybe you can sustain it for like a long time when you get to the higher states. But if you work in this modern day lifestyle, it's impossible to just not eat. But then from what you just described, this group of people that attended your seminar, they seem to be doing that.
It's absolutely possible. It is not possible, it's a reality. I can tell you that after 6 weeks of not eating, my body came to a certain level of weight, which is the same weight I weighed in high school, and then it stopped losing weight. It found its perfect balance and it remained there on its own. And I was walking every day and I was swimming every day and I was active each day and I was sleeping each night just like I am now, but just living directly on light. And that may sound crazy, but you realize that when you eat plants, you're just eating solidified light. All a plant does is take in light and store it. If you eat an animal, the animal has gotten all of its nutrition from the plant, which is all light. And so you're eating a different form of frozen light. Plants live from photosynthesis, their interactions with light. My sense is that the body does the same thing. Perhaps it's called metabolism in the human body and photosynthesis in the plant kingdom, but there is no question about it. People can live without eating. Might be shorter for one person, might be longer for another, but it's perfectly possible. The next question or next comment that comes in to me is, so what? So what? Our mind is enamored with all these ideas. Oh, they're channeling from the Pleiades, or they're an enlightened master, or they don't eat, or they bend metal with their hands, or they walk on coals. Excuse me, this is just BS. It just doesn't have anything to do with any of that. The real awakened people are not bending metal. They're not living without eating. They're not doing any of these things. They're just ordinary like you and me. They're just ordinary. All of this sensational stuff intrigues the mind. And we're sure it's a very good marketing thing. We're sure that it's going to get us where we want to go. I have not actually found that to be the case. These things are interesting. They were part of my life's journey. They impacted me. But Gary, there's nothing more important than just the loving kindness we feel from each other. Just before we started, I said to you, when was the last time you spoke to your parents? You said a couple weeks. I said, when you speak to them next, let them know they did a good job. Why did I share that with you? When I looked at you, there's something about you that's all heart. There's something about you that's just so pure and so innocent. You've never lost that aspect of your humanity. That's all it is, my friend. That's all it is. if we are fortunate enough to awaken to some of these things we're speaking of, you don't become a big shot. You don't all of a sudden start wearing robes in the world or walking on water. You're just an ordinary person that finds that their life is about helping. It's just about kindness, not kindness that you do. It's just your life becomes a prayer. Your life becomes an expression of all the things we speak about, but there's nothing to speak about. It's just caring for each other. It's seeing that you may be 43 and I may be 73, and we're both the same height. We're both exactly where we need to be. Neither one of us knows more or less. We just had an opportunity to connect. It's another moment of sweetness. So all these things are interesting, and there are a lot of interesting gifts that people possess and things that they can conjure up. For me, it's really simple. It's just being fully who we are. It's just being human.
I love it. I think you mentioned before, from a scientific standpoint, 2/3 of the energy that we get or that we operate on is from light, rather than only 1/3 is from the food.
Yeah, yeah. 2/3 of the energy that the body receives is directly from light, and only 1/3 comes from food. You see, every function of the body is light dependent. We have something called circadian rhythms. In other words, the body has a cycle that revolves around 24 hours. When it's light, we awaken and we're active. When it's dark, we fall asleep and our body restores. So there's activity on one end, there's restoration on the other. However, in between every single second, the light is changing overhead and our physiology is changing along with it. So in 2017, for instance, the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology was awarded to 3 US scientists who had discovered the molecular mechanism by which the cells in our body literally orchestrate their internal function and synchronize themselves to Mother Nature. And this is for animals, humans, and plants, so that we have optimal wellness. In other words, our cells are always responding to the changes in light in the environment and changing what they're doing dependent on light, darkness, and all the spectral characteristics in between. So the body really is a photovoltaic system.
Hmm.
The reason we are using photovoltaics for so many things is because our body runs on light. And as we discover that, our technology, we realize we can also run on light.
Hmm. So in your first few days of not eating, was it challenging, and eventually it kind of got back to you don't feel the hunger after a week or something? Like, is that kind of
Well,
the way?
the process that I went through, the first 7 days, you didn't eat and you also didn't drink. So there was no eating or drinking for 7 days. Now, I was led to believe that if you did that, you'd die. Well, obviously, that wasn't the case because I didn't drink for 8 days, actually. Uh, sure, the first few days, if you've ever fasted, for instance, the first few days, it's like you realize that we don't only eat to live, but we live to eat. So much of our eating is comforting ourselves when we are worried or going through something that's stressful for us. So aside from the physical gnawing that I felt because I wasn't putting food in, I came to realize that I was using food to escape life. the other part of this particular 3-week process that I went to was that you didn't go outside. Initially, you didn't socialize. You didn't watch television. You didn't use the telephone. You didn't read books. So you were not only taking away the food, but you were taking away all the different ways that we are continually changing the subject of life when we don't like what's going on. All of a sudden, you realize, oh my God, the mind is so loud. I mean, it was just going crazy, if you will. So the process was much more powerful than just not eating. It allowed me to see all the different ways that I and other human beings do things to avoid something that's not comfortable. And I realize that the biggest addiction is going into the mind and changing the subject of life temporarily. And we do that with thought, and we do that with worry, and we do that with eating, and we do that with exercise, and we can do that with meditation, and we can do that with sex, and we can do that with alcohol, and we can do that with drugs. We think of the alcohol and drugs as being, he's addicted to that. The biggest addictions look normal. It's the person that has to exercise 4 times every day, or
Social media, shopping.
it doesn't make a difference. It's whatever we do to comfort ourselves when we are uncomfortable. And there's nothing wrong with any of this. So, initially, as soon as I say that, someone will say, well, all right, tell me how to not do that. Well, how to not do that takes the same amount of doing as how to do that. It has nothing to do with doing it or doing something to not do it. It's something in the middle. And you can relate it to driving a car. When you're driving a car, if you get too close to the sidewalk, the pedestrians will start screaming. If you get too close to the center lane, the cars coming from the other side will start beeping. Your job is to keep the car in the center of the lane. Our job is to notice that our nature is for life to keep our vehicle in the center of the lane. All of our doing pushes it to one side or to the other side. And so, how do we gain insight from these things? Notice them. Awareness is curative. The moment we see it, something changes. I'll give you an example. I had a client a while ago, because a lot of my work is that I mentor a small number of people individually. And this person had been using certain kinds of drugs because there was a lot of stress in their life, and it helped them to feel better. And then at a certain point, he could never find that he could, whenever he said, oh, I got to stop doing this, I'll never do it again. So, of course, then he goes on a fast for 10 days, and then he finds himself doing it again, which is what happens with all of us. But one day he awoke and he was about to do it. And all of a sudden he noticed he was worried, he was scared, he was anxious, and he wanted that to cover up those feelings. And so instead of doing it, he just was with the anxiousness. He just was with the worry. He just was with the fear. And in a relatively short period of time, it started to subside. And he was able to befriend his fear, his worry, his anxiety. And then all of a sudden, it became very easy not to be using these substances on a daily basis, not because he did something to stop, because he had an epiphany, he had a revelation, he saw something. Our circuitry, what they call neuroplasticity, the changes of the brain and the neurons, most people talk about neuroplastic changes as occurring from doing something over and over again. practicing piano, yes, that causes some change to occur. But if you stop doing those things, they start receding. The changes start going back to something else. The real neuroplastic changes occur as a function of a revelation. You see something, and that awareness immediately starts changing the wiring. So there's nothing to do. The change is it just occurs internally, and then it spreads from there, like a pebble falling into a lake, and then the circle spread. So I've come to see that the changes we're looking for, that we associate with doing something, actually occur pretty effortlessly at the precise moment they need to, if we can just see what's going on and just begin to embrace more of life.
Going back to your experience with not eating and also like not binging on the external distractions, it reminds me of people describing their experiences in dark caves, not dark caves, but dark room,
Yeah,
7 days, whatever. It tends to be one of the most challenging period that they've go through. Like the noises is very loud, but once people get into it, their body or their mind start to acclimatize to almost like go into a cold shower initially, get the shock, but
right.
afterwards people get, you kind of like your body adjusts, like what you described before, your mind and everything else adjusts. But if you don't face it, people say that, hey, I work my job, I do this for the family, all this is difficult work. But very often people say, if you have no device, like no books, no food, like, and just your own thoughts, that will be even more difficult for most people than
Right.
having to do hard labor.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. All those techniques are valuable, but the real value happens when they translate into your everyday life, so that you don't have to stop eating. Your life becomes a meditation, whether there's light or whether there's darkness. In either case, your life becomes the real meditation and the real joy, because all of the miraculous things that are going on in life all the time. You mentioned something about more difficult than physical labor is all of a sudden the loudness of the mind. You know, if you're sitting and having dinner at home, and let's say you have a dog, and the dog smells the food, the dog comes to the table, gets up on the chair, starts scratching your legs because it wants some food. If you give it some food, it eats the food, and as soon as it's finished, it's back to scratching your legs again. The more you feed it, the more it wants to be fed. And there's no amount of food that will get it to go away. You keep feeding it, it keeps wanting more food. If you do the opposite of that, no, it's my turn to eat. The dog interprets that as he wants to play with me because he's interacting with me. Now the dog comes to the table, he starts to scratch. You acknowledge the dog, you pat it on the head, and then you go back to eating. And within a couple of minutes or seconds, the dog realizes that you've acknowledged it, you're not going to feed it, and you're not going to feed it. You're just going to continue with what you're doing. And within a short period of time, the dog goes away or just sits down and lays down. That dog is the mind. Every time that we identify the mind as my mind, we sign another year's lease on the treachery. So, first of all, realize that the reason we are aware of mind is because we, the real we, is noticing it. So when it begins to chatter and catches the attention, there's a noticing, and then something continues. And after a while, when you realize that your essence is not the chattering mind, but as the silent observer. You realize that the changing mind is just like the clouds as I look out my window, the clouds that are moving across the sky. We are not the clouds, we're the sky. We are that observer without a point of view. And just like all the functions of your body occur, whether you're asleep, whether you're awake, if a tiger all of a sudden came into your room, you wouldn't have to think about where to run. You'd be out the window in 2 seconds and it would occur without you. And you wouldn't have to think, oh, should I run faster? No. If something is chasing you, you'll run beyond fast. And if they're not running so fast, you'll run slower. So everything we think we have to do actually occurs automatically. When you touch something that's hot, you don't say, gee, should I touch it or should I take my hand away? As soon as you touch it, bing, your hand comes back by itself. When you meet someone, you instantaneously know whether they're trustworthy or not. You instantaneously have a connection, or you don't have a connection, or it's just a social thing. I mean, interestingly enough, we often know even before we meet them. So, what I'm sharing is everything we think we have to think about is already occurring at a much, much higher level. Once we begin to realize we are the observer, not the changing mind, the mind starts to quiet by itself. I can tell you that most of the day, I'm not aware of anything going on. And it's not because of a trick or something that I did. It's just my life is what's in front of me, whether it's a conversation with you, washing the dishes, paying the bills, sending out a piece of mail, answering the phone. Whatever comes in front of me is what I take care of next.